Mike, in a world where it's become so easy to start building a product with no technical chops, what I find super interesting about this conversation is that Vlad helps us unpack what is the role of a CTO even these days at startups.
It's a good question. This is why I loved our conversation. Vlad is a really holistic practitioner of this role. He's not just the best coder in the room. In fact, he might argue he wasn't from the very beginning, but he can do product and he can go on a long walk with you and talk through strategy while not running AI nodes because he really wants to think things through on his own. So I've really appreciated his perspective, which is what enabled him to take his company from selling bicycles to getting acquired by a text message marketing company successfully. So I'm super excited about this one, and let's jump right in.
Awesome.
Today, I work as an engineering manager at Attentive. I joined Attentive about almost 5 years ago now, when they acquired my old company, Tone Messaging. And Tone was, at the time, the leader in conversational text message marketing. We saw a lot of value in partnering with a much larger player at Attentive that brought us a lot of scale to our distribution right away. And it's been really cool to reflect on the last 5 years of the journey. And I was deliberate in saying that's my day job because I also spend a fair amount of my time working with other founders and other investors to help them along their journey. So really, I try to identify more as a founder than as an engineering manager on a day-to-day basis. And I try to bring that energy to work, but I also try to bring in my extracurriculars.
Awesome. I'm curious about the transaction itself. So let's talk about it. What was your first technical contact with this, this like Star Wars mothership is beaming this acquisition light on your smaller engineering ship? What's the first person you talked to and how did that unfold?
Well, I'll give you the super short story of how the deal actually came about, and then I'll tell you kind of how it worked from a technical perspective. Ultimately, about a year before Attentive acquired us, one of our largest shared customers introduced us to their CEO. They basically said, hey, Attentive, Tone, you got to figure out how to work together. You both have amazing products, but they don't really integrate well together. We didn't even actually have an integration to Attentive at all at the time. And when we got on the phone with their CEO basically said, like, this is cool, can we buy you? And we said, no, but let's keep talking. And we traded a couple emails back and forth, and then he ghosted us. And we didn't hear from him for like maybe another 9 or 12 months. And then a year later, a similar thing happened where we started having interesting partnership conversations with other companies, and we got reintroduced to Attentive's leadership under the same premise of like, hey, these are two great products. Why don't they work better together? We had built a basic integration at that point, but was it anything interesting? And so at that time, their CEO said, well, this is still cool. Why don't we buy you guys? And we said, no. And he said, no, but we really want to buy you. And we said, no. He said, what if the offer looked like this? And we were like, okay. So that's kind of where the conversation really initiated. From a technical perspective, to answer your actual question of what was your experience going through the acquisition as a technical founder, first wave of Diligence was much more product oriented. So the way my co-founder and I kind of split responsibilities is we kind of co-owned the product vision, and then I'd go make it and he'd go sell it. And so we spent a lot of the initial discovery calls working together as a founding team and trying to articulate what a shared vision of our platform could look like. And we even built a couple prototypes that were potentially how we would integrate inside of their platform.
So that's cool. So you were actually basically personally doing like sales engineering for the acquirer. Like you were, and this is all pre-AI. So you were doing a significant amount of time building a shared vision of how it might look like physically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did you guess, they asked, like, how did you know, like, oh, we're going to put together this prototype that's going to show us in a good light? How did you know what to even build?
And how much of an overlap was there between your product and Attentive pre-acquisition?
So the way I describe our two products is Attentive had the best version of a solid foundation for doing text message marketing. And so Attentive was really good at sending out messages that sounded like, hey, we see that you were browsing this on the website. Here's a discount for it. Thanks for signing up. And, look out for further updates from the brand. But at the other end, humans have questions. So humans want to know, hey, what size should I get? What color does it look best on me? When's this coming back in stock? What's your return policy? You name it, we had seen a version of that question. And basically, we shared a lot of the underlying functionalities. Like, we could both sign up people, we could both send text messages, we could both send automated blasts, but we had this unique ingredient, which was the conversational aspect. And keep in mind, this is late 2010s, early 20s. So there wasn't ChatGPT. That wasn't really a thing. We were trying to figure out how to run BERT models in production, but we had a mix of humans and AI with a bunch of proprietary software around it that made it so that we could magically answer these customer conversations at a very reasonable speed and cost that made it sustainable for e-commerce companies. So that was the special sauce that we brought to the table that Attentive saw value in. So they were really good at the automation part, and we were really good at the personalization part. And they were also a much bigger business than us at the time. So they had outraised us by a couple $100 million, and their growth trajectory showed it.
I was interested that demoed how you might work with them together. How did you know what to show?
What we actually ended up doing is we worked with a friend to hack us into an Attentive account, so an actual customer account. And we took screenshots of every screen in their UI and kind of downloaded that into a prototype form. And then together we brainstormed, okay, what would be the most interesting use cases of how we could apply our unique conversational personalization product to this like scaled interface. And so we kind of together these like little interactive prototypes based on their actual UI, but with these new product features envisioned as if we had been working together for the past 6 or 12 months. And for us, it's pretty obvious, right? It's about enabling those responses to messages, extracting insights out of the conversational data that would be proprietary and unique, and then helping drive some larger scale program personalization based on that. But really the core insight there as a founder for me is like, it was really valuable for us to be able to paint the picture of what the future would look like when we work together, because that turned the conversation from an abstract world, like where we're talking about like forward revenue and finances and synergy, and it made it much more tactical in the sense of we could say like, oh, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? How many of your customers would want this feature? How quickly could we scale up this use case given your go-to-market engine? So that really kind of shifted the nature of the conversation.
Yeah. As you're building all of these prototypes and you're going from the abstract, oh, maybe we should work together, to something more concrete, how are you a part of this conversation? Are you basically sitting there with your business partner talking to the corp dev folks and you're kind of like supporting with technical ideas? Are you actually like defending the conversation against like, arrogant VPs who are like, oh, how are you going to tackle on to our 10 million transactions a day with your little product?
So the arc of the conversation really changed throughout the deal lifecycle. And what I really appreciated about how we did this at first is it was very much founder to founder. So it was the two founders, business and technical product, either meeting together as a pair or zippering up and meeting independently. And I mentioned that we really changed the tone of the conversation once we started painting a clear picture of what the future could look like together. But then things evolved as we got a little bit deeper into the process. So after that initial like exploratory, hey, how could things work and what could the scale of things be, we ended up diving much more closely into a traditional diligence process. And at that point, we started to divide and conquer a little bit more. So my co-founder ended up doing a lot more of the go-to-market, client list discovery, forecasting, modeling, analysis, and of course we're in sync on all this stuff, but that was kind of the area of the product that he owned. And then on my side, I ended up having to do a very deep technical diligence with their engineering team, with their leadership, and even with some IC. So we went from some hypothetical conversations to then what was effectively an interview for me as a CTO. So I had to basically apply for a job in this context. And then we did a bunch of technical discovery on our architecture and comparisons on how the architecture could align with the broader system. And I did that working with trusted and tenured individual contributors from inside of their business. And after we passed the initial strategic, hey, does this make sense? Do our architectures line up? Could we actually integrate? My team ended up having to interview. So we were a relatively small company. We were, I think, 11 engineers, maybe 30 something people total when we were acquired. And we had most of the engineers on the team go through an interview process on the other side.
Just like a normal loop where they just like interview just like you're any other engineer.
Yep. So I spent a lot of time kind of like coaching them and working with them and like making sure that they're showing up prepared for those interviews. So it really, like my involvement really changed as we got deeper and deeper and deeper into the transaction process. But it's been really fun. And yeah, after the initial discovery, it's very much like divide and conquer and like focus on your area.
How do you keep your engineering team steady through that process? Because deals could fall through, the acquisition could never happen. They're getting interviewed by this mothership of a company. They still have presumably things to build because you have a path to go down if it doesn't happen. Do you coach them? What do you say to them in that phase?
Yeah, so we were very thoughtful about not sharing anything with the team until things were pretty much certain. And we reserved this interview as the very, very last step of the diligence process. We were very concerned that it would introduce a lot of distraction for the team to know that this deal is even out there, that it's possible, that it's on the horizon. So we didn't even talk about it at all, which is very antithetical to how we operated in the business normally. We're usually very transparent, very forthcoming. And so it actually felt a little bit awkward kind of sneaking around the back of our team. The only fortunate aspect there is this was during COVID, so we were all remote. So we could actually get a lot of stuff done without the team really noticing where we were spending our time on. When we introduced this to them, the whole day-to-day activity of the company basically stopped, right? Like everyone internalized that a big change was coming. We lost one person along the way. One of our best engineers resigned because they didn't want to go work for a big company. And one of the things that made me happy and that we were like really pushing on in the deal terms is we wanted everyone to get an offer. So even though we were happy to let all of our engineers and all of our senior leaders interview as a part of the diligence process, we treated it as an all or nothing take. So we didn't want this to be treated as an acqui-hire where they're like picking and choosing the talent that they want. And so the determination that we were aiming for is like, hey, this whole team is at the bar where we'd want them to be a part of our org. And so it was it was like a big couple weeks where everyone kind of went through this, like coaching, interview, they found out, and then like the deal was pretty much closed at that time. This is just kind of like the final aspects of it. So I think their experience is like a bit of a whirlwind. But we didn't do anything for like a month as this deal was closing.
It sounds like you were super thoughtful about this whole thing, Vlad. The work stream whereby you were looking at their UI and figuring out what tactical ways the two products could come together, is that something that you took it on just on yourself, given that you kept the rest of the engineering team away from this whole thing?
Yeah, that was just me and my co-founder kind of chipping away at it, end of day.
And how long did that whole process take, looking at their product and coming up with a cohesive story?
We tried to make it super quickly. From when we had our conversation with the founders where we expressed mutual intent to work more closely together to when we were doing the final stages of the diligence is only about 45 days, I think. And so the prototyping part, we did that over the course of like the first couple weeks of the process.
I love that you went to bat for your team in that moment where it's like a lot of founders I think would be tempted to be like, hey, I've been working so hard on this, like what happens, but you actually like held your ground on the team's behalf.
Oh, well, we built a team that we were so proud of. Like I absolutely loved every single person that we came over with. I think, first of all, it wasn't hard for me to argue that this is an exceptional group of people and that they're going to each contribute really meaningful perspectives in the new company. So it was a really natural emotion for us to say, this is it. Like you get all of this.
So what are some lessons learned that you can share with founders who might be contemplating an M&A, or how can they plan it and execute it better given what you have done?
Let me break this down. In the context of seeking an exit for your company, I'd want to admit that I was wrong about one thing. So a year or 18 months prior to us getting to this exit point, my co-founder and I were at a bit of a strategic impasse, which is like, what do we really double down on? What do we invest in? And my take was actually that we need to go very broad and build as many features as possible to satisfy as many users as possible replicating a lot of what our competitors were doing so that we can be present in competitive deal situations. And that made sense to my engineer brain because I'm saying, well, hey, I need to win more deals. I need to grow faster. What do I need to do? Why am I losing these deals? It's because maybe I don't have this like more robust feature here, or I'm missing this integration here. But my co-founder's perspective was, no, Vlad, like we're doing something really special. We're doing something really unique. We have to double down on the thing that we have created that provides value in a way that nobody else does. And I disagreed and committed, and we invested a lot more over the course of the following year in the thing that made us special, the conversational personalization aspect. And he was right, because that is the thing that enabled us to actually have this acquisition outcome. And I don't know that we could have portrayed ourselves as being able to create so much value inside of a larger player had we not spent that time truly living and breathing the main customer value prop as the core focus of our company. And so that's kind of thing one, which is you gotta be true to your core value prop, and you really have to prioritize the things that create value for your end user, not value for your enterprise. So that's kind of thing one. And then thing two, when I think about the transaction itself, and now having worked with a lot of other founders and also being on the other side of it in a much larger company, I realize that there's two kinds of transactions. There's transactions where companies are bought, and there's transactions where companies are sold. In the case where companies are sold, like we've seen companies come forward with bankers, we've seen them come in from back foot, from a position of disadvantage, and I find that those deals are never appealing or never really the outcome that people really want. Meanwhile, the founders that I've seen be really successful treat it much more as an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to partner and an opportunity to find true lift by combining two things that maybe weren't obvious on paper but really show up there. So it's not about like seeking the deal. It's about seeking a shared outcome. It's about seeking shared value and finding where that point of leverage really exists.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing those very valuable lessons.
That was a great question and a great answer. I really loved. You are a process guy, and I know you're very thoughtful about systems, and you were talking about exceptional people, and I know you're very thoughtful about hiring. But also, you're kind of like the scrappy guy, right? Like you can get into, you can just like spin up a prototype and not be too obsessed with how polished it is around the edges, and like you understand that that's what it takes to sell certain things, and you can just kind of make things happen directly and like sit there until 2 a.m. and get it done. How do you go from the scrappy part to being a good organizational leader to other engineers? And then how does that like process that you set up, it sounds to me like that was actually a pivotal part of you being an attractive acquisition target and like a good team that can actually be partnered and absorbed upwards.
The process of building a team, I think, is something that we both took really seriously as founders. And we both had a sort of a blend of what I would describe as an enlightened manager perspective, where we really cared about people's individual outcomes, their growth, their journeys, and really trying to support them doing the best work of their lives. But then also the other side of that blend is realizing that we're in a very competitive space, runway is limited, and we have to be very deliberate. And so we're also very very mechanical in implementing expectations and setting goals and moving fast and holding people accountable to that. So I think it created a really nice balance where folks felt encouraged to thrive and grow and learn and do better and have the right impact. But then pulling back on the other side, it also kept a really high bar for output and velocity and talent. I think the thing that made us really successful is the idea that any new hire had to bring something new to the table, that they would really need to have a difference in how they're approaching the world. And so we sought out candidates with non-traditional backgrounds, with diverse experiences. We wanted to make sure that we had a nice blend of humans on the team, not just engineers and marketers. And so I think those ingredients really contributed to how well the team worked together and ultimately made us successful and ultimately made it a relatively easy organization to manage. So we didn't have to be too thoughtful about, okay, like how do we make people work? How do we inspire people? Like that just kind of came naturally because we were very deliberate about building the right team.
And how does that come across? Like you're talking to someone, how do you know that, okay, this is a person like I can ride to the beyond the sunset with?
I think for me, And I don't have a framework for this, by the way, and I'm not going to try to come up with one on the spot. But I think for me, the signals that I look for the most are willingness to learn, willingness to grow, and kindness, like commitment to being kind. Those three things together, they tend to manifest in really winning behaviors at work. And oftentimes in a startup, it's not about how quickly you execute, it's about how quickly you learn. And I think our whole job as founders is to build the ultimate learning machine. And so if you optimize your hiring for that aspect, or who's going to come here and figure this out, like who's going to come help us figure out the problem versus who's going to do this task, I think that brings you to a totally different outcome in terms of the profile that you end up with.
We love that term, building the ultimate learning machine. I absolutely love that.
Sounds like a framework to me.
Yeah, you just came up with one, Vlad. You had this in you all the time. Who knew? I have one more question. At one point, Vlad, you had mentioned that you and your co-founder co-owned the product vision. Those were your words, co-owned product vision.
right.
And I was thinking, wow, that's very interesting. How, and also you talked about an instance where you disagreed with your founder. You said disagreed yet committed. So I'm curious to know, on a day-to-day basis, how did you both manage co-owning a product vision? Any advice, especially when two technical founders start a company? How should they think about doing this in an efficient manner?
I think that figuring out the product roadmap was actually one of the things that we were least strong at. It's definitely something that we really struggled with, and it wasn't always clear how to make the right decisions. And if we had a shared framework that we could apply uniformly across our short-term planning and also more meaningfully our long-term planning. And the way we operationalize that is just by working really closely together and talking through what our vision was in a way that was very candid and open. So I have fond memories of going for long hikes in the forest, talking through, okay, here's what it needs to look like in 6-12 months. Here's what I think it's going to be. Here's how I think we win. And we basically just kind of kept
And you were talking to your co-founder about all this on these long hikes?
Yeah, so it's just me and my co-founder out in the forest talking about what we think the future should be like. I think the closest that we ever came to having a process was this thing that we started doing where we'd go out into the forest and talk about our respective vision for the company for any number of hours. And then we'd go back and try to kind of re-summarize it and pitch it back to our investors. And so I have fond memories of my co-founder and I going out and having a bunch of these long strategy walks where we would each try to basically convince each other what the future needs to look like in 3 or 6 or 12 months or even further out. And then we had an amazing partner in our seed investor, Ben Ling of Bling Capital, who we'd always be able to come to with, hey, here's how we're thinking about the world. Tell us how you would react. Tell us how you'd think about us if we did this. And Ben was absolutely amazing at shaking down our plan, making us grounded in the reality of our business and the way in which we could actually achieve these plans. And also at the same time, reminding us that we need to be aspirational and shoot high and really go big. And so we kind of went through a bunch of these planning cycles in our last 1 or 2 years as a business when we really had to start to think about our journey more thoughtfully. And looking back, I didn't realize that this was our process, but this was the process that we set up. This was the framework where we'd paint a vision, try to articulate it, try to pitch it, come back.
Would you do anything differently?
I think adding more structure to the vision would definitely help us get to a place of understanding faster. I think I would have started with more documentation, and maybe we shouldn't have done it on a hike. Maybe it should have been in front of a computer. I don't know if we would have gone to the same outcome or a different outcome, but ultimately, looking back, if we had had just better, crisp documentation, I think we would have had an easier time reaching consensus.
Do you think now with AI tools, actually the hike is the right setup? Because you can have a note taker, you can have this sort of silent third partner with perfect organizational skills, just managing that context for you while you can be more creative and you can be breathing fresh air and talking about the important things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, AI has definitely changed my workflow, even in my day job now. And I think it really changed how I approach some of these kind of basic organizational tasks. To answer your actual question, I don't think that having an AI note taker on our hike would have really changed our outcome. The gap that I felt looking back at that time now and reflecting on it with you is much more around having a starting point upon which to evolve and iterate on a vision. So we never really had like a master plan. We never really had like the blueprint. We always had a very, very visionary perspective on what the future of commerce would need to look like. But we didn't know how to build it. We didn't have the steps mapped out. We were always kind of figuring out the steps. And I think this is what I'm reflecting on in hindsight that I would have wanted more of is just having the map put in place and then being able to iterate on it in sort of a nuanced by step kind of progress.
Can you say a little bit more when you say having a map? What would you do to arrive at it? And the reason I'm double clicking on this is, especially with how quickly you can build software now, there's so many people that, including myself, frankly, I have 50 ideas for random things that I could be building right now that I could potentially build before the end of the day. But prioritizing that is harder than ever. And I'm curious, with this infinite possibility, how do you actually prioritize what's right for your business? Especially if you already have a business that's kind of fledgling and growing. And the resistance, starting at something new and going to Claude and be like, prompt product is always going to be much lower than the really hard work of getting to that next incremental set of features that unlocks your next customer in an existing early stage business.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my God. Mike, that's so true. So here's my hot take. I don't think AI has changed the actual number one thing that is scarce, which is time, reasoning, judgment, and decision making. So today you could go and have Claude effectively build you 50 prototypes for your 50 ideas on your startup ideas list. But what doesn't change is your ability to triage those 50 ideas, your ability to think about the long-term strategy and vision of how you build those ideas. What has changed is your ability to execute. Your velocity in testing those things is faster now. But you still have to be accountable for the prioritization, the investment, the long-term strategy of how you get from point A to point B. Point B is a multi-million or multi-billion dollar business. And when I think about, okay, what's my map? What's my roadmap? It's really just a tactical breakdown of, hey, I have this vision. I need to figure out the practical steps that get me to that vision. And those practical steps are now a lot more easy to achieve. Like if we have a hypothesis along the way that like, hey, if we had this feature that did X, our customers would do Y more, we can test that really quickly now in a way that we never could have before. But I think that origination and that decision-making process is still very much the bottleneck in terms of what you can accomplish in a day, a month, a year.
And isn't that problem magnified, Lad? Especially because there's almost like an illusion that using Claude can create, which might make it seem like all these 50 ideas are all almost equally easy to build, even though the prototype not equal to what it might have to look like in production. So maybe the mind also gets tricked into thinking that, okay, these are all equally good 50 ideas.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Ultimately, it's super easy to say, hey, oh my God, look at this prototype that I just built, or like look at this thing that I built. But I think that's discounting the operational work of really bringing something to market and bringing something to production. And as a technical founder, my first instinct, I think, is to think about, okay, how do I actually productionize this code? How do I make it scalable and safe and deployable and maintainable? But then when I put on my founder hat on top of my engineer hat on, then I think about, okay, well, what is the actual product ecosystem that this thing needs to live in to be able to go to market, to create real value for someone's use case in more than just a one-off? At least when I think about a scaled product. Now, if I'm talking about an internal point solution for something that I'm doing at my day job now, I think that dynamic has forever changed, where I don't need to worry about all these things, and I have a framework in which I can develop specific solutions. So it's different when you're starting from zero versus if you're building on top of an existing puzzle piece now, where I think in some ways the incumbents, the people that have a platform, a distribution network, a support network, will have more to gain by developing velocity with AI, because those things are still the hard parts to figure out in how you grow and scale a business.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, so how long do you think you still have a job?
Cool. How long do I still want a job for?
That's a fair question. But I think like you sold the company, so you have more options. But let's say like somebody is coming to you who's younger
Middle
right
manager.
now, right? Or maybe you're a manager, but like You have that integrative thinking, but somebody is coming to you who's more technical. They spend 4 years studying physics or computer science or both, and they're vibe coding some prototypes. How do you take them into your team and lead them to actually be a good engineer? Or honestly, like, do you even lead them to be an engineer? Do you lead them into some other profession?
Okay, so I'm about to say some really spicy stuff, which
That's what we're here
I
for.
may want to like reserve the right to pull out of the show.
Mike, get ready. Mike doesn't like too much spice, but
Well, uh, salt and pepper goes first. So let me start with the not too spicy stuff. I think about a year ago, the conversations I was having with other leaders in engineering were around, hey, the shape of engineering teams is going to be totally different. Like we're no longer going to hire junior engineers. It's all going to be senior engineers that are leveraging an army of autonomous agents at any given time, and they're treating them as the workforce. And I think I'm starting to see that reflected in the job market. So we just had a couple positions open, and for my senior role, I had a really hard time filling it. For my junior role, I got 2,000 applications in one day. And so I think a lot of employers have already kind of internalized that shift, that last year's perspective of, well, I don't need junior engineers to write code anymore. Like I can extend my code writing through AI agents. My perspective has actually evolved a little bit beyond that. And actually just hired a start of career engineer, mostly because I think that the nature of the work is changing. So it's no longer about writing good software or writing good architecture. Claude can help you figure out if your architecture makes sense. Being a good engineer now is about understanding the product that you're building, understanding the solution, understanding the technical requirements of the system around it, and understanding how to plug it into the existing Lego pieces that help you scale the business. And I think that skill, of course, grows with experience, but is much more about someone's judgment, someone's ability to reason, someone's ability to problem solve, understand, simplify, acquire context, and use these tools effectively. So I don't think the junior engineer is dead. I think that we're going to keep seeing an investment in tools that make this workflow a lot easier. And I actually think that we're going to see a lot more cross-functional collaboration in the process, because ultimately these tools are making it easier for designers and product managers and less technical people to, first of all, understand how systems work. So
Excuse me.
PM no longer has to come and sit down with an engineer on my team to say, hey, can you tell me how this feature works? Like, we've never really understood, because they can ask AI. And then conversely, in environments that are a little bit better set up for it, people can start to make changes on their own and work together as a team and really distribute the accountability of like, okay, how's the product work? How does the product look? And how does the product scale between the triad? So I think TLDR, engineering isn't going away. It's just really changing shape. And I was talking to a buddy of mine about this the other day, and we kind of shared a version of this chat. And he said, "Man, I don't think I want to work in that world." Like he became an engineer because he wanted to write code, and like that's the thing that made him happy and made him satisfied. And he's tried these tools, and he's like, "Yeah, like they're pretty good." But I think what he's struggling with is the loss of that identity of a creative writer versus a problem solver and a like mover of like a mover of concepts. So if you're willing to change how you think about the role, I think you have a job forever. I don't think this job is going away. But if you're still thinking about it as, hey, like my job is to write code, then you're going to be unemployable in 3 years.
That's a good framework to think about things. But how do you get better at solving problems, right? Is it without becoming essentially a sort of technical integrator product manager, right? Like, how do you still understand, how to query an object relational database and like basics of that kind of software engineering? Or like what
and
a
also
basic
how
function is?
important is that, do you think?
Yeah, how does that matter anymore?
Yeah, that's a question. It looks like you don't think it matters anymore.
I don't think it does. I haven't written a SQL query in a year, and that's something I spend half my days doing as a manager of a large team. So I don't think those skills matter anymore. I think we're at a point where like we've passed this point of no return where hard technical skills matter so much less than the vision and perspective on how product gets built and how product evolves incrementally based on what exists already.
So Does that naturally mean there is a significant change in how one should look at a CTO, a technical co-founder in this day and age?
Yeah.
And if so, what is that? If the CTO's job has become so much simpler, does that argue almost for not even requiring a CTO anymore?
Well, I love that as a spicy take. So, should the CTO go away? Does that role go away? I don't think so. And what I'm actually seeing in the market now with startups that I'm involved with is really small teams that stay small for a long time at the beginning. So, I've seen startups that raise 5, 10, $15 million and they have a team of 3. And I think that trend will continue to evolve as you see these tools become more and more powerful, where you really don't need to start scaling up your team. You don't need to start scaling up that burn rate until you have true product market fit. And so I think a lot of the early work becomes less so about setting up a technical infrastructure, because all that's kind of like magically handled now, and much more about like being a partner in the technical product discovery. So what about the way in which we're building? What about the capabilities of the platform that we're building can enable more value for customers, and thinking strategically about that. So I think that's kind of like the evolution of the early stage CTO. And I think the evolution of the medium and later stage CTO is very much one of an enabler. And this has always kind of been the case. Like when you scale past a point, you have to step aside and let your team do the work, and you become more of a coach and more of a visionary leader than a implementer. But I actually think in this context, the enabling needs to be more hands-on, because historically what you'd have to do is you'd have to kind of get out of the way to let your team really own the things. But now the thing that owns the thing is Claude, or insert your autonomous coding agent of choice. The expectation for a technical team now is much more about collaborating as a EPD triangle in getting product off the ground and moving really quickly and making good decisions and providing advice and perspective on what makes sense and what doesn't, and what's hard and what's easy. So I think the role becomes a lot more consultative, the CTO role, where you have to support your team and having these kind of higher order conversations versus just getting out of their way and letting them code. So in some ways, I think you have to get more in their way now.
That is very, very interesting and makes a lot of sense. Mike, you're a practicing CTO yourself. Would you agree with that? Is there anything at all that you want to add based on what you're seeing?
Yeah, this resonates completely. A lot of early efforts has been some sort of mix of engineering and kind of team and process and just raw grit. Like it's the role of a CTO in the first 6 to 12 months of a company, and the next year or two, and then the next 10 years are very different. But it's interesting that that cocktail of skills is starting to get remixed a little bit. Now you can have somebody who maybe they have a super well developed ability to manage that context and steer a bunch of agents, but then they don't end up with a product that people actually want to use because it's built to their own template of what's good, right? And so what I think Vlad mentioned earlier, that AI just amplifies your effort in whichever direction, right or wrong, is really becoming very visible right now.
Wow, I love that. Amplification of whichever direction, right or wrong, is such a big statement you just made. And I wanted to share something here, which is that I worked with my share of CTOs, and I have seen a spectrum on the one end of which CTOs would be more technologists, doing things because it was just cool, it fancied them, not necessarily something that was even relevant to the business or customers. And then the other side is what you both are talking about, which is meaningfully moving the business and leveraging technology to do that in a consultative manner. So it seems like you can leverage AI in any which direction, but the place where CTO can have, and the way that a CTO in this day and age can have the most significant value with AI is to be in lockstep with the business, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that is spot on. Like you become so much more of a business partner when the tech stuff becomes easier.
Yeah.
Your value is really being the connector.
I think something that all three of us have heard a lot in all of the rooms that we've been in the previous era is that VCs were kind of like that accelerant. I think they would love to say these things that like, hey, we help you drive off the cliff or fly, but like we make the speed go faster. It's almost like engineering is taking over that lever now. Like now engineering can make you fly or drive off the cliff very quickly.
Yeah, the gas, like we just added a turbo. I think
Yeah.
Your take is spot on. Like this amplifies any direction that you're pushing in, and it makes you go 10 times faster there. And engineering's got the foot on the gas now. So it's all up to us. We have more leverage than ever before.
Mike, I just want to say, I don't know who you were listening to, probably too many VCs, but engineering always had the lever. Let's not forget who funded Claude. There was some VC money involved.
This is true. Now that we know your journey and you've seen both sides, you've started from the beginning, you've been through an acquisition, you've been at a big company, so you really have all these perspectives on the path of an engineer today. How would you counsel somebody to follow that path? If they wanted to, if they're a technical person, they want to sharpen their technical skills, whether maybe that doesn't mean coding anymore, but that means this new phase of it. And then ultimately they want to build a business or multiple businesses. What do you think they should do? Should they go work for a startup? Should they work for a big company? That was kind of a cliche question back then, but I think it's changing a little bit now. Do something else entirely. Anything that you would share to somebody who walks into your office now and asks this question?
Yeah. So I have maybe a controversial take on this, which is I think that working for big companies is the absolute best prep for starting your own startup.
Okay.
Because you get so much perspective on A, what the end outcome needs to look like if you're in a successful company, or B, you get so much perspective on pitfalls to avoid. I think today information's cheap or free. Like the value of information is basically zero. I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when the only thing we had was like some Paul Graham essays and a couple Medium blog posts, it seemed to be like a very natural step that if you wanted to become a founder, you'd have to go work for a startup so that you know how startups operate and like you learn how to be a startup founder. And I think if you get the chance to learn from a really visionary leader and see them operating up close, I think that's a super valuable experience. But 99% of the time, that's not going to be the case. You're going to be grinding away at something that goes nowhere for probably a very long time. Statistically speaking, that's the outcome that most startups end up at. And so I think my general advice for somebody who would be at the start of their career now is get a sense of what really good looks like. Surround yourself with the most interesting people doing the most impactful work that you can so that you can really get a sense of what the bar is for what good looks like, for what good teamwork looks like, for what good technical work looks like, for what good collaboration looks like. And I think that mostly happens in successful medium and large size companies, or at least you're more likely to find it there. So that's my pro tip.
I love that. I want to even echo that a little bit because I mean part of my job is I see a lot of companies that have kind of gone the wrong way through a few turns, and a lot of people in those positions are not learning. So if you do want to go take a job at a startup, be really careful which one you select. I think what you said about knowing what good looks like is critical.
Yeah, and I can't agree more with that. Startups are extremely overhyped, especially here in the Valley.
It's really, it's such a tough proposition. I look back at my time as a founder and I can't believe I got people to work for me. I don't know how I did it. The risk and effort to the potential reward, the expected value of that reward, the math is just super, super, super hard. And so, of course, we compensated by making it fun and meaningful and rewarding and trying to empower people to have the right kind of impact and do really, really great work. But yeah, wow, tough sell.
You're a very humble person, Vlad. Extremely humble for what you've accomplished. Awesome. Well, I think we're ready for our final closing question here with you, Vlad. So could you share with us a favorite book or movie, TV show, anything that you found interesting, inspiring, or any combination of those?
I'll give you the first answer that came to mind. The book that probably had the most meaningful impact on my career trajectory is this book called Reboot by Jerry Colonna. And so Jerry's a executive coach or CEO coach to many successful tech founders. And this is one of his earlier books that I think he bases a lot of his practice on. And for me, it really helped me figure out that balance that I was talking about earlier between being candid, being vulnerable, being transparent, being open with your team, but at the same time being bold and visionary and unapologetic about your goals and what it takes to achieve them. And I think before I read that book, I kind of felt like those two things were at odds. Like being a kind, compassionate, empathetic leader didn't really fit in with having high output or keeping a high bar for your team. And I think Jerry's take in the book is much more about, hey, if you're willing to be open and vulnerable and unlock the part of yourself that you're actually kind of like most afraid of showing to the world, that will empower you to then lead your team with full conviction. So strong recommend for that book, and the other books from the Jerry Colonna crew are also fantastic.
That is awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that recommendation. And it was so wonderful chatting with you, Vlad. Thank you for your time.
I love chatting with both of you. Thanks so much for the thought-provoking questions, and I hope we get to cross paths soon.
We will. Thank you for your time. Talk to you soon. In New York
Bye.
for stuff. Bye.